Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth, along with Stuart Hack, and we welcome Jeff Pearlman to the broadcast. And Jeff, how are you tonight?
I'm doing okay. I mean, 2020 is a crappy year, but I'm trying my best.
Yeah, 2020 is anything but that. Vision-wise, it's good. Year-wise, it's not. Stuart, how you doing?
I'm doing well, considering it's 2020.
Yeah, we have a unanimous here for all the wrong reasons. So anyways, Jeff, I understand you have a book out there called Ring Circus. Why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of what it's about?
Well, it's about the Shaq Kobe years of the Los Angeles Lakers Dynasty from 1996 to 2004. So from the rise to the addition of Phil Jackson as the head coach to the back-to-back titles, and then sort of the demise and the dissolving of it and the banishment of Shaq to Miami. So kind of chronicles that entire era.
What made you decide to write a book about this particular dynasty or this particular team?
I'm a big fan of characters, of large figures, of people who can carry a narrative. And I just thought it's not that often you get three iconic sports figures in one thing. And yet Shaq, Kobe, Phil, all in this one tight arena. I just thought it really made for a good. I had written a book years ago called Showtime about the 1980s Lakers, and the organization is really interesting. Lakers are, they're there with the Yankees, and the Dallas Cowboys is kind of the larger than large organizations. And I just thought it made for a really ripe and rich narrative.
Do you think in 10 years you'll be writing a book on the LeBron Lakers?
Certainly possible, or a LeBron biography would be great. It's certainly possible. You never know. Maybe. They'll probably win this year.
How interesting enough is it that we're all wearing baseball hats in the game one of the NBA Finals between the Miami Heat and the Lakers takes place in just a couple of hours from now. So the irony of baseball hat talking basketball, my goodness. Stuart, I can't remember the last time we ever spoke about basketball, if I do.
I don't know. It's been a while, but so
we can talk about baseball if you want.
Well, we'll get to that maybe a little bit later because you've written your share of books about baseball as well and football. Mm-hmm. So Ring Circus, Kobe, Shaq, and Phil, were you able to interview the three of them?
I got two of the three. I got Phil for many hours, and I got Kobe. I got Shaq for about an hour and 20 minutes in Atlanta. So 2 out of the 3. And I did it all before Kobe died. I just wasn't able to get Kobe. He just didn't participate.
Now, was there any thought of delaying the release of this book because of his recent death, Kobe's recent death?
No, we obviously talked about it, I guess. So, yeah, I mean, we talked about it. I just thought, and for wrong or right, I don't know, ended up coming out 8 months after he passed. And people always say, like, you need more time. But I didn't really know what more time meant. Like, how many, is a year the right amount of time? Is 2 years? Is 6 months? I kind of felt 8 months, okay. A decent amount of time, whether I'm right or wrong. That's kind of how I felt.
How many people did you talk to total for this book?
About 300.
Wow. Were there any that stood out one way or another?
Phil Jackson gave me 8 hours driving around Montana, which is kind of amazing.
Really?
Shaq was fantastic. Just really funny, really nice, really lively. Dale Harris, the coach, the longtime Laker coach, gave me about 6 hours at a golf club in Dallas. There are a lot of I love that thing. I love, going around, tracking down people, seeing who has what to contribute, different people's thoughts. It's kind of the joy of it all. The writing is the hardest part. The reporting is the most fun. So I really did enjoy going around and meeting all these people.
Now, I think I heard you tell a story about you interviewing J.R. Ryder.
I did interview J.R. Ryder. Do you remember J.R. Ryder?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I knocked on his door. I randomly showed up at his house in Arizona. He did not know I was coming. I didn't have a phone number, just an address. He was not happy to see me at all. And I thought he was going to punch me in the head, but he actually ended up giving me a 2-hour interview. So I've had a lot of history. I've had a long history of knocking on doors. It's always one of the scariest things to do. And then usually, not always, usually it works out okay.
Because I remember you said you did that for the USFL book, where there was some of your interviews there, you would randomly just knock on doors. And I think there was one you said you took your son on a road trip.
Yeah, we went to find former Los Angeles Express defensive lineman Greg Fields. And my son at the time was probably 10. We walked all over San Francisco. I had this one address. We decided we'd make it a day. We're going under bridges and really bad areas. And I think the area I ended up taking my 10-year-old son was like the crack capital of San Francisco. So it wasn't my father of the year moment. And we got to the door, and there was a lockbox on the door. Then later that night, I wound up at his sister's house, and she gave me his number, and I ended up talking to him. So I enjoy the track. Like, the pursuit is one of my favorite things. It's like, it feels very detective-ish, you know?
I think we're going to be looking forward to reading your son's book in a number of years.
Yeah, he'll probably written from years and years of therapy.
What was Del Harris like, Jeff?
Very nice, very conservative, sort of socially.
Right.
Every way you could think conservative, not just politically, but kind of socially. And the thing that players didn't like about him was he talked too much. He talked and 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 wouldn't be quiet. And it drove the players crazy. He's a really, really nice human being. You would trust him a million ways over to whatever. You know, he's just a nice, steadfast guy. He's a vastly underrated basketball coach. I think he's a great basketball coach. He just talked too much, and players tuned him out after a while. But I really liked him.
What about Pat Riley? You ever have any dealings with him?
I did a book about Showtime. He wouldn't talk. So I've not actually had, yeah.
Wow.
What kind of teammate was Kobe during that time?
Kind of crappy. You know, he became better as he got older, but he was pretty self-absorbed and didn't want to be a part of it. Wasn't looking to be buddies. I can't say crappy. I mean, he always played hard. He practiced hard. He went at it hard. He was never taking a day off, you know, everything. He wasn't great. Like if a bunch of guys are going out to dinner, nah. A bunch of guys are going to a movie, nah. Cards in the back of the plane, nah, I'm okay. Like, just kind of kept to himself. When he got married, his no one was invited to his wedding. Like, no teammates were invited to his wedding. Most of them didn't even know he was getting married. He was just a different kind of guy in that regard. He was very standoffish and to himself. But he was obviously a tremendous, tremendous basketball player.
Well, we all know that Phil Jackson, known for the Zen Master. Could you see the Zen Master qualities in him, since he obviously did a heck of a job as a father figure towards one of the polarizing figures, Dennis Rodman?
I thought Phil Jackson was amazing. Amazing. And I did. I think a lot of times people forget that, you know, people always say, well, you know, he had the best players. It's always a criticism of Phil Jackson. He had the best players. It's not easy to manage those egos. Like, it's not easy to manage those egos. And he was really good at it. I mean, you look at Jordan, who was the best player on the planet, and he agreed to give up scoring to play in the system. He goes to L.A. He's asking Kobe to be number 2 to Shaq, and he did not want to be number 2 to Shaq, but he did it anyhow. You know, he did it anyhow. So I think Phil's ability to manage players, to deal with players, is as good as any coach who's ever lived.
Did he give you many Michael Jordan stories at all, what it was like to deal with him?
No, because we didn't talk about it that much. There were definitely comparisons between Kobe and Jordan, and people tend to compare the two because they were similar players.
Right.
I just think Jordan was more like a partner to Phil Jackson, and Kobe was more like a player who I have to work on, you know.
What kind of relationship did Kobe have with Shaq from the beginning, and how did it evolve over time?
It was never great. The thing is, Shaq wanted to be your big brother. Like, he wanted to be Batman and you're Robin. And he wanted you to want that too. And he wanted Kobe to be deferential. But Kobe wasn't a deferential person. You know, that wasn't his nature. So it just was always kind of strained. And they would have physical altercations sometimes. But mainly it was this weird passive-aggressive, Shaq is saying this over here, Kobe's saying this over here. Then you go back to Shaq and Kobe, and the media's going back and forth. And it just was they were great basketball players, so it worked out on the court, obviously. But they were never going to be buddy-buddy. They were just really different. But I think when Kobe died, the hurt and the pain you saw Shaq show was very, very real. Because he felt like he lost someone. It's almost like one of my favorite rock groups of all time is Hall & Oates, Daryl Hall and John Oates. And they don't really like each other. They don't hang out on the road. They don't go to dinner together. They fly in from their different places. And that's what they do. But if one of them died, the other would be devastated because you're looking at someone who formed this magical partnership with me and we went through a lot of life together. And I just think that's sort of what they had. It was just like, it wasn't a love affair, but it was a partnership that led to some really great things.
Did that dynasty have to end when it did, or could it have gone on a little bit longer?
I think it had to end. There was Kobe was out the door. He was going to go to the Clippers if Shaq stayed around. Shaq wasn't really keeping himself in the same shape he used to. Kobe wasn't listening to Phil Jackson anymore. After they lost to Detroit, Kobe said to one of his teammates, "There's no way I'm ever playing with that MFer again. Like, I'm done with him." It was just over. So people are like, "Oh, what could have been?" Nothing could have been. Like, sometimes if I don't want to do it, if you two decide I don't want to do a podcast with you anymore, I don't want to do a podcast with you anymore. Well, it's over, Well, we can get you guys back together. No, I don't really like him anymore. Like, I don't want to be in the same space as him anymore. Yeah, but you guys are doing great. Yeah, but I don't like him. I don't like him, and I have options here. So I'm going to do it with someone else. That's exactly what it was. And it's funny when people are like, "Oh, it could have worked." It's like, no, if you don't like someone and you have the option of not being with that person anymore, and you can exercise that option, you tend to do it. So it wasn't going to – it's like I wrote a book about the 86 Mets, and people would be like, how many more World Series could they have won? I was like, 0, because Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry were addicted to cocaine. Gary Carter's knees were shot, and Keith Hernandez was getting older. Like, you can't – you know what I mean? Like, there are just some things that you can't change. And that was something you couldn't change. They were just done with each other. They had no interest with each other anymore.
Well, let's talk about the 2004 NBA Finals, Detroit Pistons. I've covered the Pistons for a lot of years, even dating back to the Bad Boys era. I saw a lot of good teams back there. But what was the attitude of the Lakers? Did they feel like they knew that they were heavy favorites and there was a lot more pressure on them, especially considering the way that Detroit, with no glaring superstar, were able to humble the Lakers and win it relatively earlier?
You sound like a Pistons fan.
Well, I'm a Pistons writer with Pistons ties, and I'm proud of it.
Who's your all-time favorite Piston?
I have to go with Isaiah.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, the little man,
the
heart of the team, I didn't like Bill Laimbeer. I got to tell you a funny story. Many years ago when I was at the Boston Garden, I had torn my ankle on Christmas Day one day, and Bill Laimbeer and I never really got along anyhow, so I'm in the Boston Garden locker room with Dennis Rodman, and Bill's making this wise comment, okay? And Dennis said, Bill, why don't you cut the guy a little bit of slack? And I told Bill right in front of Rodman, I said, you know what, Bill, just because you got enough money to make a car payment doesn't mean I've got one. And that's when Dennis Rodman laughed so hard and said, Bill, get off of his case already. Dennis gave me whatever I wanted. That was long before his change of polarizing personality. But
who were you working for at that point?
The Detroit Monitor.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Nobody liked Laimbeer. Everyone hated Laimbeer. Laimbeer was a pain in the butt.
That's putting it lightly. If this wasn't a family show, I'd get the explicit button, the ... But I'll let great minds think alike, GMTA. Why don't you think about that for your next book, GMTA, coming from me, the motor.
Wait, do you know
what's that?
Do you know the story of when Will McDonough, do you remember Will McDonough, the SI?
Yeah.
Yep.
When Will McDonough punched Patriots defensive back Raymond Claiborne in the locker room of the Patriots?
Oh, it was a lot of guts.
And like a moment for all of us, like a win for all of us. For every time we have a Laimbeer to deal with, or John Rocker, or whoever it is, that moment was a win for all of us.
Well, I'll tell you, Bill Laimbeer was never one of my favorite people. That's probably the major reason why he never got an opportunity outside of Kurt Rambis with the Minnesota Timberwolves as an assistant coach. But if Bill Laimbeer had any sense at all and played the politics somewhat straight, he might have gotten at least a taste of coaching in the NBA. He couldn't even get a job with the New York Knicks when Isaiah was in charge. What does that tell you?
Well, I always think it's interesting, like Barry Bonds right now is struggling to get a job in baseball, right? And I covered the majors. I was at Sports Illustrated. I wrote a book about Bonds. He treated everyone like crap. He just treated everyone like crap. And Kareem, one of the great players of all time, one of the smartest players in the history of sports, couldn't get a coaching job in the NBA.
Right.
People remember how you treat them when you don't need to be nice to them. People remember that. They remember how you talk to the guy who holds the door for you, for the guy who cleans your shoes, for the guy who does your PR, to the fans, to the media. They remember that stuff. And when you're a guy like Bonds or Laimbeer and you treat people like garbage because you're on top of the world and you think you can get away with it, Well, 15 years later, when you need a job, they're going to remember it.
Well, we talk about the Miami Marlins, obviously a team I'm quite close with. And I was at the 2003 playoffs when the Giants lost to the Marlins. I happened to get there in the fourth inning. I didn't even know I had credentials. The Marlins went on to win that game. There was a collision at the plate with Pudge Rodriguez. I could have gone on there and talked to Bonds, but I didn't want nothing to do with him, Jeff, because of what you said. Why would I want to deal with a prick like this? Okay. And, you know, he only lasted 1 year as Don Mattingly's hitting coach, and Don Mattingly's the most even-keeled guy. So I decided to take the champagne bath in the Florida Marlins locker room and bypass the Barry Bonds abuse bath, okay, that you have. Do you ever heard of a guy named Tony DeMarco?
Now, who's that?
Well, he's been a long time baseball writer. I know a lot of people. I'm sure after this broadcast.
You know more than I do, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you and I have a lot of people in common, which is kind of cool. You're right, though. Getting back to your point, Barry Bonds, okay, treat people like garbage. Bill Laimbeer, it does bite you in the butt, and it bites you in the butt. But I got to tell you, I enjoyed covering the Detroit Pistons during the Bad Boys era because they learned how to win, and that Showtime team actually taught Pat Riley how to coach a little when he moved on to the Eastern Conference. And I think the Pistons Bad Boys era is probably one of the most disrespected dynasties out there, since you're a guy that likes to cover dynasties.
And they had Fennis Denbo in the team, one of the great names of all time.
Yeah, I'll bet the average individual won't tell you that Fennis Denbo is a University of Wyoming graduate, but I'll tell you.
He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated in a cowboy uniform.
I remember that. See, Stuart, look who you brought together. Jeff Pearlman and I, man, we got to stay in touch when this bad boy's over, buddy.
Stuart, don't you have anything to add here? Come on.
I could talk about tax law, but, you know.
That'd be good.
Yeah, Stuart told me about jock tax already.
Nice.
But let me ask you, Jeff, you talk about guys that treated you bad and they're kind of getting what's coming to them. Was there anyone years ago that was treated you really well, and now 10, 15 years later, they're still around, whether it's coaching or managing?
Oh, a lot of people. I mean, one of my favorite people, and he stayed a friend, and I always liked him on a personal level because when I was a kid, we were required as Jews to root for our favorite Jewish ball players because there were only about 4 of them in the world, was Sean Green of the Dodgers. And Sean doesn't live that far away from me. He's actually become a friend. He's just a decent human being and a really good guy. It's sad that he died so young, but Tony Gwynn was wonderful and great and just a storyteller and would sit there and talk to you for hours and treated people with dignity. And, you know, went on to coach San Diego State, his alma mater, before he died of cancer, which was heartbreaking. There are a lot of – the thing is, you remember the jerks because they kind of – the stories are pretty good. You know, like I remember John Rocker and Will Clark and Bonds and guys like that. But the vast, vast majority of people in sports are just like the vast majority of people outside of sports. They just want to get by in life and have a good time. And if they can help you, they can help you. So the vast majority of people are always pretty good to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, every now and then you do run across a bad egg. I've always wondered, it's probably a little mystery in my mind, why a guy like Patrick Ewing never got a head coaching job, because I know that he factors into one of the better people out there, but unfortunately circumstances never played themselves out. I don't know if you follow Patrick Ewing's career much at all.
It's so interesting you say that because he used to be horrible for reporters. Horrible for reporters when he was with the Knicks. He would not talk and he was rude and blah, blah, blah. And actually, you know, now he's a head coach at Georgetown, so that's a pretty good gig right there, you know, so at least it's worked out in that regard.
I think some of that started at Georgetown when he was in college where John Thompson protected the players and didn't
Definitely.
really.
And also he took so much abuse. He took a ton of abuse from fans. And, you know, like, we always forget we don't allow these guys to be shy. Like in society, if someone's shy, we'll just be like, well, he's kind of bashful. We don't allow that of athletes. And a lot of people are shy, you know, and he seemed like a pretty shy, reluctant guy. Pippen was the same way. Scottie Pippen, I think, was just a really shy, awkward guy. And then you throw him in the spotlight and you put a mic in his face and you expect him to be gregarious and outgoing. It's kind of unrealistic. You know, not everyone comes in the same package.
You talk about going full circle, though. 1982, I went with a friend of mine in New Orleans and saw the Final Four with Michael Jordan, Dean Smith. I was up in the nosebleed over at the New Orleans Superdome. But later on down the line, though, Jeff, I would end up coming in contact with Gary Bender, and who was at that time the play-by-play guy for CBS and called that game. It was really neat how, you come see some of these guys back then, but then you bring it all together as you're in the profession a long time. And being in the industry like we are, we certainly don't have any short stories, even though I haven't written my first book yet. I'm looking for my first book, and God only knows when it'll take me to get around doing it. But
it is funny. It is funny how it kind of reminds me when you move somewhere. Like I moved to California 6 years ago, and every year I'll be driving around, and all of a sudden it clicks. Oh, I took this street, and I ended up here, and I know where I am here. It's just like directions click, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get it. It's the same with like when you work long enough in an industry like media or sports, where all of a sudden you're like, oh, this guy knows this guy, and this guy knows this guy, and they were all together, and he was covering the Pistons when Fennis Denbo was there, and Fennis Denbo went to Wyoming, and I know the SID at Wyoming, and here we are, and here we are. It's funny how it's just this one big incestuous world of sports and sports media where we all know each other. We're all 1 degree of separation from each other.
Well, I wrote a story today, actually, that'll be on the South Florida Tribune later. And what that talks about is, when we cover games, you meet new colleagues. And if somebody passes away, you feel like you kind of know them a little, because as big as our world is, it's a real small world, if you know what I'm coming from. And, it's always like to meet the old guys, the new ones. And yet at some point you never know, like if you lost touch with them 10 years ago, it's like and then you catch up with them. It's like, it's like you've talked to them yesterday.
Well, we're all kind of in the same fraternity.
Yeah, we are.
Like we're all in the same fraternity. We've all, like, you have Bill Lambier, I have John Rocker, someone else has this, someone else has this. So we all have our war stories, and we all have our, it's a great press box, the blah, 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 or the ice cream in Dodger Stadium is great. Oh, really? You should try the so-and-so. Like we all have that. So we're basically like all on each other's roadmaps, which is kind of cool.
Now, as a coach, okay, can you only imagine what practices would have been like with Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, and Phil Jackson, as I had to do it with Chuck Daly, and the fact that these guys had to earn their minutes based on what they did. Chuck Daly used to use the practice as a way to divvy up the minutes. So what were practices like during that era with those three guys?
Intense, oftentimes intense. I mean, Kobe kind of dictated the intensity of practice because he would not go easy on people. So in those games, if you're guarding Kobe Bryant, whoever you are, he's coming right at you hard. And that set a lot of the tone. I don't think teams in the late 90s, early 2000s practiced in the same way that the sort of the era of the Pistons or Showtime Lakers did, where in a way you were fighting for a position. Like, I don't think coaches used practice to gauge where you were in games, as far as game ready as much. I think they were more for staying in shape. But I think for that era, I think the Laker practices, largely because of Kobe, were more intense than other teams.
Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I just want to get clarity on this, okay? But, do you feel that Phil Jackson has lived up to the name Zen Master, which is what his nickname is?
Sure. I mean, it's all kind of goofy, right? Like, it's all a little goofy.
Exactly.
But I think he's a great coach. I think he's a great coach. I think it's all kind of goofy, though. Like, he would hand out books to the players. Like, here's what the vast majority of players did with these books. Oh, thanks, Phil. It's not like they were like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's great. Or like they'd meditate and like, all right, we're all going to sit here and we're going to, I tell it to players about it. Most of them are thinking, oh man, I hope I get laid tonight. Or, oh man, I can't wait to have the seafood at so-and-so. Or, like you're supposed to be in your Zen place.
Right.
A lot of it, but the intent was good. And even if you were sitting still for a few minutes and you were thinking about whatever, the blonde you met at some club or what movie's coming out or what, whatever, like that's fine. Like he was into stillness and taking moments and being contemplative. So I think other coaches definitely thought it was a little gimmicky at times. I think some of his players probably thought it was a little goofy at times. But yeah, he was authentic and he meant it. He certainly meant it.
Did he ever give books to members of the media?
He didn't give one to me. I don't know of any reporters he gave. I gave him a book. In fact, Weird USA, he emailed me today. And it's not like we're email buddies, but I gave him one of my favorite books, which I highly recommend, is a book by Pat Jordan called A False Spring. It's a baseball book. It's my favorite sports book of all time. And I gave it to him. And he emailed me today randomly and said, what was the name of that book you gave me? And I was like, it was A False Spring. So I gave him a book.
What I find interesting a lot of times when you deal with an iconic coach is, especially like Jackson, how he's able to blend the egos of Jackson, Bryant, and O'Neal, because what you have are three massive egos in one locker room, and any great coach has that task of doing it, especially knowing that Chuck Daly had to deal with the dream team with all those personalities. How do you think he handled being able to blend all those egos in one, trying to keep them as a collective unit, knowing what the real goal was is to win that championship?
I mean, he did a few things really well. Number one, he wasn't overly intrusive. And if you look at that locker room during those years, they always had, like, you look at those Laker teams, outside of Shaq and Kobe, it's not like, man, those teams were loaded with talent. Like, it's not like, look at those, like, when Magic and Kareem were rolling in the 80s, right? You had Jamal Wilkes, you had Norm Nixon, you had Byron Scott, you had Michael Cooper, you had Michael Thompson, you had James Worthy. Like, it was a who's who of really, really good NBA players.
Right.
You look at these teams, it's Rick Fox, it's Robert Horry, it's Horace Grant, it's Brian Shaw, it's Derek Fisher. Like, they were every other team's kind of seventh and eighth men, and they were a little long in the tooth. Most of them were 31, 32. They were no longer 25, 26. So it wasn't that they had a ton of talent surrounding them, but they had perfect pieces like Jerry West, then Mitch Kupchak and Phil. They built these teams really well, because it's not just having the best players, it's having the right pieces. And he had a lot of clubhouse or locker room sheriffs. Like Brian Shaw was a locker room sheriff. Rick Fox was a locker room sheriff. And if you have mature leaders in your locker room, you don't really need to always be inside there. So he was very, very smart about who he trusted and how he used them.
Yeah, we had that in Detroit when you had Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer policing the locker room when they acquired Mark Aguirre and shipped Adrian Dantley there. They let Mark Aguirre know that who was really in charge, whatever your track record was, isn't going to be. So you had your built-in robo-cop, so to speak, in there. If I'm looking at your shirt correctly, is that an old Tampa Bay Buccaneers throwback? Come up there and show it to us. I got to.
No, wait. It's not what you think. It is an old school Buccaneers throwback. It is Tom Brady's head under the hat.
Oh, wow, it is.
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't know if that was the 2020 vision coming out of my eyes here, or the 2040 vision that makes it look like my glasses are any better. Yeah, it does show a little Tom. Where did you come up with that thing?
So I saw, I've been low on shirts lately, and the pandemic has kind of had me longing for shirts. And I saw Brett Favre was at a Buccaneers game wearing this shirt, and I found it online. I just really liked it. And I love their old logo. And I wish the Buccaneers were wearing their old uniforms, because they're the greatest old uniforms ever.
Yeah.
So that's all.
Well, here's what I'm wearing, okay? Not quite as big as yours, but Conference USA football, folks.
Very nice.
Air Florida Atlantic University territory. But
let me test you. If I tell you guys my college nickname is the Blue Hens, can you tell me where I went to college?
Delaware.
Very nice.
I'm good.
The wing tee. They used to run the wing tee off. They used to run the wing tee with Tucker Raymond.
Don't they copy the Wolverines maize and blue type of thing? I remember going out to I actually visited the University of Delaware campus a while back when I was in the area, but the Blue Hens.
Blue Hens.
You got
nice
it.
Job.
The Motor City Mad Mouth. So when I send you that friend, Scott Morgan about the Motor City Mad Mouth, remember me as the guy that knew who the Delaware Blue Hens are.
I will indeed. You have my word.
That's what it's all about. But yeah, it's so when you talk about this dynasty, and we talk about the 2004 matchup with the Pistons, and they added Karl Malone, who actually went there to try to get a ring. What was it like having Malone there searching for that ring with a group as strong as this one?
So they actually added Malone and Gary Payton that same year. They had both of them. So it was 4 future Hall of Famers on one roster. But it was a nightmarish year in a lot of ways. That was the year when Kobe was flying back and forth to Eagle, Colorado for a sexual assault case. Shaq was really angry about not having his contract extended, and he was being a pain. Phil Jackson wasn't sure if he was coming back, didn't know what was going on with that, was very frustrated. It was a really ugly year in many ways. And, when they reached the finals, people said they expected the Lakers to dominate the Pistons. And if you actually knew, as I did learn from reporting, what was going on, it's kind of a miracle they even made the championship series. Like they They were done. They were spent. They were over with each other. And you look back at that Pistons team, I got to say, first of all, Larry Brown's job with those Pistons is one of the best coaching jobs I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at them in the playoffs, they played Indiana in the Eastern Conference finals. And they held them like 75, 68. They were just this machine. They really were. And they didn't have any future Hall of Famers. Their best player all time was probably Rasheed Wallace or Chauncey Billups. Ben Wallace was their center. They were badly undersized. Tayshaun Prince, Rip Hamilton. And they just completely, totally figured out the Lakers. Malone got hurt in that series. Kobe Bryant shot without any consciousness whatsoever, just shooting and shooting and shooting, never looked to pass. And when it was over, I mean, truly, people were shocked. It was a 5-game series. People were shocked the Lakers lost. I think the Pistons probably could have swept them. They were that much better.
Yeah, I had heard stories that, and ironically, Joe Dumars, I had spent time with him not only in Detroit, but when he was in Miami, because the road went through the Miami Heat. And he told me he didn't care about that budding superstar. But yet later on, he would end up trading Billups for Allen Iverson, and there went that theory right down the toilet. But
yeah.
Or at least that year. Did you ever have a chance to get to know Chick Hearn pretty well?
I didn't, because I wasn't living in Southern California when I wrote the first book, Showtime. I think he had just passed. So
okay.
I did not.
Yeah, I actually met him when the Pistons played the Lakers at the Silverdome, but that's for another story. And again with that, so I know have another 5-10 minutes to go. Stuart, anything you want to add before we let Jeff promote his book and allow us to let everybody know what we do? Go ahead.
Stuart has been way too quiet. Stuart, I've been waiting for this question. This question is the question I've been waiting for.
How close did Kobe come to becoming a New Jersey Net?
This close. So 96 draft, the 1996 draft, the Nets have the number 8 pick. Their coach is a very young, very green John Calipari, straight out of UMass, mid-30s, full of gusto and bravado and, all that stuff. And they work out Kobe 4 or 5 times and love him. They're just all in on Kobe Bryant. They call his parents and say, we're probably going to draft your son. Great, that's great. Right up the turnpike, because they were in Philly, near Philly, and this is Jersey. But Kobe had just signed a sneaker deal with Adidas, and Adidas did not want their star client, the face of their product, in East Rutherford, New Jersey, for the next 5 years. Jerry West worked out Kobe for the Lakers twice. Said it was the best workouts he's ever seen. Arn Tellem, Kobe's agent, was a good friend of Jerry West, so Jerry West made it clear to Arn Tellem they would love to get him on the Lakers. Heading into the draft, Jerry West agrees to a deal with Charlotte. If Charlotte picks Kobe with the 13th pick, they'll send him Vlade Divac, the center, and Charlotte will trade the Lakers the rights to Kobe. But John Calipari and the Nets are committed to getting Kobe Bryant. And the day before the draft, Kobe calls John Calipari and says, I don't think I want to play for you guys. I kind of want to go away from home, so don't draft me. Calipari's like, crap, what am I going to do? Oh, my God. He goes into John Nash, the general manager's office, says, what are we going to do? He doesn't want to play here. John Nash is like, calm down. It's just bluffing. Kobe's agent calls John Calipari, says, Kobe's not going to play there, so you shouldn't draft him. He'll take a year off. He'll go to Italy. He's not going to play for you. Calipari's freaking out. Goes into John Nash's office. What are we going to do? Don't worry about it. He's going to play for us. Not a big deal. Kerry Kittles, his agent, David Falk, calls John Calipari. Listen, my client desperately wants to play for the Nets. If you don't take him, if he's there on number 8, I can't guarantee I'm ever going to bring another client your way. Oh, my God. He runs into John Nash's office. John, what are we going to do? Cal, they're just bluffing. We're all good. So that night, they're committed. We're taking Kobe Bryant. The next day, John Calipari shows up. Now, John Calipari in his contract had final personnel decision. He had final say on the Nets. John Nash is around, a bunch of Nets executives around. He goes, all right, here's what we're going to do. If Kerry Kittles is available on number 8, we're taking Kittles. If he's not, we're taking Kobe. John Nash is furious. The draft comes, number 8 pick, there's Kerry Kittles. For the 8th pick in the 1996 draft, the New Jersey Nets pick Kerry Kittles. Jerry West in LA is euphoric because he knows the next 4 teams have no interest in Kobe Bryant. Charlotte takes Kobe. The swap is made. Jerry West goes into Jerry Buss's office and says, I just got you the best player in this draft.
There you have it.
Anything else you want to add, Stuart? Don't want to steal your thunder.
All right. So you've written a bunch of books, and I'm not going to ask you to pick your favorite one because it's like asking you to pick your favorite child. But what book was the hardest for you to write, and what book was the easiest for you to write?
I mean, none of them are easy. They all take, but I feel like this book was probably the hardest because modern athletes the more modern you get with athletes, the more difficult they are. They've been much more coddled. They've been much more pampered. They are convinced they're very special at a young age, and it's just a different generation. So it's harder to get them to open up. It's a lot more work. I wouldn't say the easiest, but my first book about the 86 Mets, The Bad Guys Won, I mean, I was 14 years old, 13 going on 14 in 86. I mean, that was one of the joyful years of my life. It's my boyhood. It's my childhood. It's sitting in my neighbor up the street, Mr. Gargano on Emerald Lane in Mahopac, New York, was a diehard Met fan. I go to their house and watch the games and ask them. So it was like jumping back into my childhood, which made it really joyful. So that was probably the one.
So do you know what your next book is?
I'm doing a biography of Bo Jackson. Is my next book. Yeah, I love Bo Jackson. Big Bo Jackson admirer.
Okay. Sounds good. Because I remember when we did the USFL book, you mentioned the Laker book coming up.
You guys are always getting the scoop what the next book is.
So Bo Jackson is the next. Do you have a title?
I do not. Do you have a title? You got a title for me? I would love to.
I mean, I guess it's obvious everyone knows Bo or.
Yeah.
I will tell you.
Wait, I got it. Hips don't lie.
Oh, very nice. How about Hips Do Die?
There you go.
Yep. Let me tell you, of all the athletes I've ever gotten to enjoy over the years, I love Bo Jackson. When he did, I know about the story leading out of the Buccaneers to where he ended up going. Bo Jackson, to me, is unbelievable. And another thing that you said, Jeff, that really I can relate to, you're right. I love the old school athlete. Now I struggle with today's athlete. I really do. Because back in the day, you could get more out of them now. They're protected by PR guys. And, of course, social media, they're more threatened by it. So I can appreciate everything you're saying, even dealing with them, as I often do. Anything else you want to add, Stuart, at all that we have or haven't covered?
I think we've covered just about everything.
All right. So with that said, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and let people know how they get a hold of you, and then we'll go ahead and I'll give them everybody out here our contact information as well. Jeff, we really appreciate you being on the Sports Exchange. It's really been a lot of fun talking basketball with you, which is a nice change of pace, especially with something that I can really relate to based on where you've gone. It really is really refreshing. It really is. And I'm really delighted that you agreed to come on the Sports Exchange tonight. So, Jeff, take it away. Let everybody know how they can get a hold of you and how they can obtain your book.
I do want to say, first of all, I think you've inspired me that my next book will no longer be Bo Jackson. It will be the Fennis Denbo biography that the world has been waiting for.
Is that right? Can I write the foreword on it?
Please do. Please do.
Yeah. But then I'll tell you what, I'll devote a hashtag here for this broadcast, Fennis Denbo, to inspire you to write the book. And I'll make sure that we got the Wyoming Cowboys. I might even tag this broadcast Delaware Blue Hens just for you.
I appreciate that. I don't know if you heard last night during the debate, I'm not getting political, but Trump said to Joe Biden, you finished last in your class at Delaware State. Joe Biden did not go to Delaware State. He went to the University of Delaware. There were 2 colleges in Delaware. Trump was incorrect. He's a blue hen, just like me, Joe Flacco, and Rich Gannon, and Chris Christie, actually.
Well, here, I'll even help you out a little bit. This is my age coming into play. Once upon a time, a guy by the name of Jeff Comlow was there as well.
And, Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I know. We had to use him. He was like a 9th-round pick. Gary Danielson goes down. The backup goes down. Jeff Comlow goes down. And for those of individuals that understand my East Coast here, the Delaware State, I believe they're the Hornets. Is that correct?
They are.
My goodness, I know my Delaware sports.
You need to find a hobby. It's too much. If you know the Delaware State Hornets, and if we're talking about Jeff Comlow, something's wrong with this podcast. I feel like this podcast, it's gone way off the rails if we're talking Jeff Comlow. It's like,
well, it's only because it happened when most of these people that are watching it weren't even alive. And I remember Jeff Comlow, my God. When you talk about injuries that occurred during the preseason, Gary Danielson suffered a devastating injury against the Baltimore Colts. And then the Lions had to go 2 and then 3 deep. The guy that was drafted the ninth draft choice became the number 1 quarterback, and all that did was lead to Billy Sims. Boy, life was tough, wasn't it?
I'm going to throw something at you before I tell. You can reach me at on Twitter at Jeff Pearlman. It's the best way to reach me. Book is available everywhere. Where did Eric Hipple go to college?
Utah State.
Oh, jeez. That is amazing.
Did you think and you know what? I had him on a broadcast too. I actually saw him over at the Super Bowl.
That is amazing. That is amazing. The
Really?
fact that you got Jeff Comlo and Eric Hipple, you're the champ.
Well, no, you are, because you agreed to come on this broadcast. All I have is just a complimentary piece of this whole thing.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
You'll remember the Motor City Mad Mouth. And I'm not beating you up, because that's what I go by nowadays when I'm on the broadcast. Not that you'd have a hard time figuring out. I'm not the LA Motor Mouth, obviously, because we talked a little bit of Michigan stuff. So with that said, okay, so once again, Jeff, go ahead and let everybody know how to get your book, and then Stuart, you can give your information without the jock tax reference, and I'll go ahead and give up everybody mine.
My book is available everywhere. It's called Ring Circus, about the Shaq Kobe Lakers, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Pearlman.
And we have a 3-ring circus here tonight with Jeff, Stuart, and myself, only our version of it. Go ahead, Stuart.
So I'm Stuart Hack. I am the owner of Hack Tax and Accounting Services, a firm in Wellington, Florida, Palm Beach County, where we've developed a pretty big tax dynasty, almost 3 rings, 3 tax returns. You can reach me, 561-214-6171, or www.hacktaxandaccounting.com.
Now, as for me, okay, you can hear this broadcast on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at Tribune South. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, South Florida Tribune. This broadcast will be on our South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. For those of you who haven't subscribed to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel, now would be a good time, because we bring people like Jeff Pearlman on the broadcast. Our website's www.southfloridatribune.com. We have a lot of writers that also write for us. We have media distribution partners, and all the broadcasts are there. Plus, we have a section for Motor City Monitor, where I do a lot of Detroit stuff as well. Can't forget the hometown. Our email is southfloridatribune@gmail.com, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Scott Morganroth. Be more than happy to go out there and connect with you then. So, Jeff, we appreciate you coming on the broadcast, and, it's always great to meet new people, make new friends, and, after all, for those individuals, if you don't remember anything else, remember Utah State, Delaware Blue Hens, and Fenistembo, and everything else that Jeff Pearlman wants to throw out your way. When I get to LA, I'll have to look you up.
I just want to say, of all these, so I've probably done about 140 different podcasts and interviews.
Yeah.
Of all the podcasts I've ever done by a tax accountant and a guy who knows where Jeff Comlo went to college, this is by far the best. By far.
You got to put that in the reviews, Scott.
Well, you know what? I'm hearing it from him. I don't know what to say. I'm speechless, and for me to be speechless, it takes a lot to do. So thanks a lot for the kind words. I mean, I've been, whether you know it or not, I've been in this business for 41 years. I started out when I was 17 years old.
No, you guys are awesome. And I just want to say, first of all, your knowledge of sports, your authenticity, not asking cliche questions. This has been one of my favorite interviews. I really appreciate it, for real.
Well, then I hope you agree to come back on at a later date, because you're welcome to come back anytime. Jeff, you're really great, and I look forward to getting my hand on the book. And if you need me to write a forward, I already gave you all the information. So
I'm just going to jot down what you said. Yeah, we're good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being on the Sports Exchange. This is the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth, Stuart Hack, and our special guest, Jeff Pearlman. Thank you again, Jeff, for being on the broadcast. We appreciate it. And you're welcome anytime you want. Good night, everybody.
Take care, guys.